If you follow this channel right about now, you're probably saying to yourself, wait a minute, didn't he release this video already? Am I going through some sort of deja vu? No, you are not. I did release that video already and I am re-releasing it again because since the release of that video, I had gotten a ton more information from BougeRV regarding their solar array and their solar charge controller. So I decided, let me just take that old video down, reshoot some of the parts that needed to be updated, and here we are. The updated install video of the solar array and solar charge controller by BougeRV. So today marks the day that I am delving into the complex world of auxiliary power, dual battery system setups, solar power setups, that type of thing. And I am still learning as I go. And as per usual, feel free to correct me or drop tips or give me any advice. If you know about this type of stuff, drop it all in the comments below. Now today is going to be phase one, where I'm going to be installing a solar array and a solar controller to the one deep cycle battery that I have in the rig. Okay, before we get into the nitty-gritty of all this equipment, the installation, all that good stuff, I just wanted to take a moment to discuss the why of what it is that I am doing. This is more for people who are new to overlanding and are just wanting to learn the basics. If you're one of those people that have been doing this and know exactly what it is that I'm doing today, and you just want to get to the product and the installation of it, then feel free to skip ahead. Timestamps are below. Simply put, when we're camping and overlanding, we need power. Now, where that power might come from, well, that varies. You might be at a campsite that has electrical. Easy. Plug up, you're good. But what do you do when that kind of electrical is not available? For example, you might have a primitive campsite, or you might be hitting the trails and then pulling off to the side and spending the night there. And that is what we call auxiliary power. Now, when it comes to providing your own power, there are really only two ways you can go about doing this. Number one, power banks. Power banks are really popular. Those are your Goal Zeros, your Jackeries, your Blue Eddies. And what's great about power banks is they can power up your phones, power up your camera batteries. You can even run your fridge on some of them. But the selling point behind power banks is that they're portable. They're not stuck inside your rig. The downside about having power banks, however, is if you have anything that's hardwired to your rig, for example, if you have like scene lighting on your roof rack, well, you can't power that up with your power bank. So let's talk about fridges, for example, because many of us run fridges, and you're probably watching this video because you're trying to figure out a way on how to keep your fridge running when you're camping and overlanding. I know people who will plug up their fridge into the vehicle, and then when the vehicle is in motion, then the vehicle is basically running that fridge. And then when they get to camp and the vehicle gets turned off, they unplug the fridge from their 12-volt socket in the vehicle and then plug it into a power bank. That can work, except that I really don't want to have to take that extra step of unplugging it from one place, plugging it up into another, because if I forget to do that, well, now I'm draining my vehicle's battery in the process. Which brings me to the second way of getting auxiliary power, and that's vehicular. Basically, you're plugging things up to the vehicle and letting the vehicle charge it. Now, when your vehicle is in motion and you're driving around, all good. Anything that you plug up is going to be charged up because your alternator is continuing to keep that battery topped off, and then that battery is in turn charging up all these things. The problem happens when you're idle. When you've stopped the vehicle, you've turned it off, now your battery is not being recharged by the alternator, and now your battery is going to be drained by all the stuff that's plugged up to it. That's not a good thing, because what you don't want is to wake up the next morning and now your vehicle won't start. Okay, so where does that lead? Well, that's when people start talking about dual battery systems. It's basically adding a secondary battery and having all of your accessories run off that second battery or your house battery, while keeping your starter battery full so that you're not going to get stuck. And having a dual battery setup is great. I mean, honestly, I want one, except that that's kind of the gateway into building out an auxiliary power system filled with solar panels and DC to DC chargers and all this other stuff that can get really complex, really expensive, really fast. So before you go diving into the financial deep end of all of this stuff, take the time to assess your needs. Really look at how you're using your rig and what you're powering up, and then build your system accordingly. So what does that mean for me? Well, I've been monitoring what I've actually been using vehicular power for, and I have found that I've only really needed to use vehicular power for two things, and that is my fridge and some of the off-road lights that I might use at camp for scene lighting. Now I found that with my current setup, without any solar or anything like that, after I upgraded my stock starter battery to a deep cycle battery, I'm able to run my fridge for about 12 hours along with some lights here and there before the fridge actually shuts down and saves just enough juice in my vehicle to start back up again the next morning. And that's why I consider this to be phase one, because with my current usage, having the fridge run for 12 hours off just the vehicle without the vehicle being turned on, that's a pretty long time. But what if I can kind of have a safeguard, something that will continue to keep that battery topped off when we're idle? And that's where the solar system comes in. If I can plug a solar system to the current deep cycle battery that I have, then during those times that we're not moving, granted we have plenty of sunshine, and here in Florida we have a ton of sunshine, then we're basically going to continue to keep that battery topped off and hopefully extend how much longer I can keep that fridge running without having to turn the vehicle back on again. So with all this stuff being said, let me just show you what we're installing. Now obviously the star of the show is the solar panel. This is a 100-watt monocrystalline panel. I'm hoping 100 watts is enough. This is what they sent me, so I'm willing to try it. But if I find later that 100 watts is just not enough, it's just as easy as unplugging this one, unmounting it, mounting on a new one, and then plugging that one in that has a little bit more power. Now I also opted for the rigid solar panel versus the flexible ones because right now I'm going to be mounting this to the crossbars on top of my rooftop tent. That way later if I decide to upgrade the solar panel, it's as easy as just unbolting it and mounting a new one on. Now up next are your solar charge controllers, and what these basically do is it converts all that chaotic energy that your solar panel or solar array takes from the sun and converts it into useful energy to put into your battery. And when it comes to solar charge controllers, you basically have two types. You have a PWM and you have an MPPT. Without going into it too much and making this video too long, always try to go for the MPPT. It's just a lot better at converting that energy. It's a lot more efficient. So on a 100-watt solar panel, for example, you'll get most of that 100 watts versus a PWM where you may not get all of those 100 watts that it's receiving from the sun. The only reason why a lot of people might go with a PWM is number one, I mean, it's much smaller, you can see, and also it's a lot cheaper, where a PWM might run you about $40. An MPPT controller will run you upwards of about 100. So there's a huge price difference there, but this does work out a lot better. But this is a 40 amp MPPT negative ground solar charge controller. I'll put all the links below if you want to check out the specs. I just don't want to go into it too much and make this video too long. Some of the other stuff I needed to get to complete this install. First up, the BougeRV extension cable. The solar panel is going to sit on top of my rooftop tent, and then the solar charge controller is probably going to be somewhere inside the vehicle, so I need ample cable to be able to run from that panel to the charger. Now if you're going to mount your solar charge controller somewhere inside the vehicle and your solar panel is obviously on the outside of the vehicle, well, you now run into the problem of routing wires from the outside of the vehicle to the inside. Many videos ago I did a video on some cable glands, and we're going to be using another one of those today. This is a different kind of cable gland than I used before, but it's the same concept. This basically creates a seal on the roof of your vehicle. They use this for marine stuff, but you can definitely use it for your rig so that water won't go inside your vehicle. And then I got some 10-gauge wire terminals to allow me to tap into my battery. To mount the solar array to the crossbars, I first measured the distance between the mounting holes underneath the panel. Then I loosened up the crossbars, adjusted the distance according to my measurements, and did a test fit with the panel. With the crossbar brackets in the right position, I removed just the crossbar portion. I found it would be easier to mount the panels to the crossbars this way. With the whole unit assembled, I used some scrap pieces of wood to act as risers while I mount the crossbars and solar panels in place. Alright, just walking you through the solar charge controller, you have your LCD display right here. Then you have 3 lights over here. You have one for PV or your solar charger, you have one for battery, and then you have one for fault. And then over here you have a touchscreen button. And then right down here, this is just a magnetic cover. When you remove this, and I'm actually going to keep this off for the install, this is actually so you can have access to the screws to loosen or tighten the screws. Once you loosen it, you can then plug your wires directly into these 4 ports right here. These 4 ports, you have one for PV, positive and negative, so that goes directly to your solar panel. And then you have your battery, positive and negative, and that goes directly to the battery in your vehicle, whether that's your secondary house battery or, in my situation, my starter battery. And then right over here you have your RS485 communication port, and then next to that you have your external temperature sensor port. I don't think I'm going to be touching any of this on this install. And then over on the side you have your grounded terminal. Now, wiring up a solar charge controller is actually not as daunting as you think, so long as you know what you're doing. Now, I am not a certified electrician. If you are not comfortable with doing wiring and things like that, please go get someone to install it for you, like a professional, but I'm not going to be responsible for that. So you have your battery, the battery that you are going to charge up with solar. Now, you can't just plug up your solar array directly to your battery. That's not how this thing works. There's way too much chaotic energy that's going in your solar panel that it needs to get refined before it gets put into your battery, and that's where your solar charge controller comes in. So the solar charge controller just basically is the in-between the solar panel that's on top of your roof and the battery that you are charging up. Now, when it comes to mounting your solar charge controller somewhere, the rule of thumb is to have it as close to the battery as possible to prevent voltage drops. Now, being close to the battery means putting it somewhere in the engine bay, but I do not want to be putting this in the engine bay just because it gets really, really hot in there, and I don't want to have the solar charge controller in there. Plus, if you look inside my engine compartment, like, there is just no room at all for something this huge. This thing is pretty massive. Now, what some people do to alleviate this is they'll mount this inside the vehicle in the passenger side up against the firewall, so that brings it a little bit closer to the battery. But again, because this thing is pretty massive, I don't want my passenger accidentally kicking it once in a while. Now, I can put it in the glove box, but I am currently using the glove box for other things, and I don't want to be putting it there either. Now, my solution is to mount this behind the rear seats. Behind my rear seats is the cargo area, and that's where I have my drawer system. That drawer system has a flat space in the back, which is perfect for mounting a solar charge controller. But again, that's going to be pretty far from the battery, and we kind of want to prevent voltage drops. So what I'm going to do, this solar charge controller comes with 10 gauge wire to plug from the solar charge controller to your battery. Well, I'm going to up that up a notch to 8 gauge wire. So I'm going to have 8 gauge wire going from the battery to the firewall, snaking all the way to behind my rear seats where my solar charge controller will be mounted. And then for the solar panel, that's going to have 10 gauge wire coming in through the roof of the vehicle, snaking in and then making its way to the solar charge controller. Now, when you are wiring this thing up, and this is important, you need to wire up the solar charge controller to your battery first before you wire it to your solar panel. If you wire up the solar panel to the solar charger and it's not hooked up to your battery, you risk damaging your solar charge controller. Now, one thing that I'm going to do that's not in the instructions is I'm going to add 2 40 amp circuit breakers to this system. 40 amps because the solar charge controller is 40 amps. The way it's going to work is in the engine bay, coming out of the battery, that positive wire that's going to your solar charge controller is going to go to a circuit breaker first. This is non-negotiable. You need to have your fuses and your circuit breakers as close to the battery as possible to minimize that distance for where things can catch on fire. Because anything after the circuit breaker, then the circuit breaker will click off and then basically shut everything down. So you want to be as close to the battery as possible here. So from the battery, that positive wire is going to go directly to a 40 amp circuit breaker, and then from there, it'll go to the solar charge controller. Now, the second 40 amp circuit breaker, that's going to go closer to the solar charge controller, and that's going to be the circuit breaker that goes to the solar panel. So So right from the solar charge controller, minimize that distance, put a circuit breaker there, and then from there the positive wire will go all the way to the solar panel on your roof. Now, even if the instructions don't make mention of using any circuit breakers at all, I'm adding them as a peace of mind. It just makes me feel better knowing that if ever the system goes above 40 amps, it'll just trip those circuit breakers and shut the whole system down, and I'm not catching on fire. You can use inline fuses if you're more comfortable with that, but I'm going with circuit breakers because I can also use them as kill switches. So during daily driving or for hitting the trails and I'm not using solar, I can just go ahead and turn the circuit breakers off, shut the solar system down. I'm not getting any solar at all going to the battery. And then when we get to camp, if there is enough sun and I want to take advantage of solar, then I can go ahead and click those things on, and now I got solar going to the battery again. Again, pretty straightforward if you know what you're doing. Again, if you're not comfortable with doing wiring, please have it professionally done. But we're going to go ahead and add some battery terminals first to some of these wires so that they'll be ready to be attached to the battery. We'll snake it to the vehicle, attach it to the solar charge controller first, and then go ahead and plug it up to the battery, and then we'll get the solar panel, get that routed into the vehicle and plug that into the solar charge controller, and then ground the solar charge controller somewhere, and that's pretty much the install. To get everything wired up, first thing I did was add battery terminals to the end of 8-gauge wire going from the battery to the solar charge controller. Next, I mounted one of the circuit breakers in the engine bay, then crimped on some battery terminals to a short piece of wire to connect the circuit breaker to the positive terminal of the battery. Now inside the vehicle, I attached the positive and negative wires that will go to the battery into the solar charge controller. Then I mounted the solar charge controller permanently. Once it was connected, I connected the other end of the positive wire into the circuit breaker and the negative end into the negative terminal of the battery. Moving on to the connection to the solar panel, I mounted the other circuit breaker close to the solar charge controller and again crimped on a terminal to a short piece of wire. I then connected that terminal to the circuit breaker and the other end into the solar panel positive input in the solar charge controller. From there, I connected the negative wire coming out of the solar panel into the controller and the positive wire to the circuit breaker. After I tested to make sure all connections were solid, I started work on installing the cable gland. The cable gland will allow me to route the wires from the solar panel to the inside of the Jeep. I won't go into full detail on how to install one of these, but I'll leave a link on the video I did installing one of these before. It was a different type of cable gland, but the concept is the same. After that, it was just a matter of hiding all the wires. Okay, so starting over in the battery, from the battery, we got a positive wire coming out of that and then into the circuit breaker, which I decided to mount right there. And then from the circuit breaker, we got another wire going all the way through here. This is actually a great place to route wires to the inside of your vehicle on the Jeep without having to go through like the firewall. And then you also have the negative wire just going directly to the negative terminal on the battery. Now what I did here, you have this little kind of a ledge here and it's kind of sharp, and it's not super sharp, but I decided to put just a piece of rubber, one of those rubber trim pieces there, just so that if this thing is rubbing up against it, it's not going to start cutting up this wire. And then from there, it actually enters into behind this area here. If you were to pop that off, that's where the wire will come out of, and then from there it goes underneath the vehicle, along the trim, and then along this trim, and then snakes up under the seat and over to the solar charge controller. And then for the solar panel, that solar panel, the positive wire is going to this circuit breaker, and then from there it goes into our into our solar charge controller. All right, now for the solar panel side of things, you'll see the cables coming out of the solar array. You see it coming out and down, and it goes to some quick connectors that are waterproof, and that connects to that extension cable that I was showing you earlier. That extension cable goes through and into the cable gland and inside the vehicle, and it actually comes out somewhere inside here, which is good because this whole panel is covering it. Then you have the wires coming out from there, goes inside this pillar, goes all the way down, follows to here, and it comes out somewhere underneath here, underneath where I put my fridge, underneath the back seats, and then comes up to the solar charge controller. All right, now that everything is hooked up, let's go ahead and turn the system on, see if it's powering it up, see if we can get some solar as well. Not sure how much we'll get though, because we're kind of overcasted. Sun keeps peeking in and out, so we'll see what we can get. But remember, turn on the power first from the battery before you turn on the circuit breaker that's plugged up to the solar. All right, looks like we're getting signal from the battery and we're getting a light for the solar array. Let's open up the app and see what we're getting. So I kind of just want to walk you through the app, show you how it's all laid out, how it works, and basically what kind of power we're getting from this thing. You are going to need to download the app in order to monitor and control the settings of your solar charge controller. Now, if you don't want to use an app, BougeRV does sell an external monitor that will allow you to change settings and monitor it that way. Just plug it up to the RS port and mount it somewhere in your vehicle, but why go through all that when you can have everything at the palm of your hands, right? So first thing you have to do, obviously, is download the app. Just go to your app store, look for Charge Pro 2.0, or go to the instructions. You'll see two QR codes, one for Apple users, one for Android users. Just scan the one that's applicable to you. Once you've got it downloaded and installed, go ahead and open the app. As of right now, it's not connected because I kind of want to just give you the layout of this thing. Up at the very top, you're going to see your battery. Right now it's showing 100%. It's not connected. And then below that, you'll see solar input. And that's basically what's going into your solar panel. Right now, 0 voltage. And then next to that, you'll see charge mode. And that will show either MPPT or PWM, whatever kind of solar charge controller you have. I've also seen it go to boost. And I'll talk about that in just a little bit. Below that, you'll see battery. That's what's going into your battery, and you'll see the current, the voltage, and the power. All right, and below that, you're going to see DC load, and that's basically what's coming out of your battery. You'll see current, voltage, and power. Here's the thing. When I first hooked this whole thing up and I connected everything, that whole section went away, and I'm wondering, well, why the hell did it do that? And they said that this particular solar charge controller doesn't have a DC load terminal on it. So there's not a terminal here that you can hook up to your battery in order for it to read what's coming out of your battery. So just keep that in mind. I don't know if their other units might have it, but this particular one does not. Now below that, you'll see controller. That's where you'll see any kind of errors that this controller is throwing. Right now it's showing none. And then you'll see today's running data: highest voltage, lowest voltage, charge amount, discharge amount, max charge power. Now at the very bottom, next to real-time monitoring, you'll see historical data. If you click on that, that'll basically tell you how it's been these last few days, right? So you'll see total running days, you'll see total charge amount, and then total discharge amount. And then up at the top, you'll see today's date, and then you can toggle back and forth to different days to see how it's been looking. So you just click the arrow to the left or to the right, and you'll be able to go through the different days. Or you could just press your finger and you'll be able to go through the different days by just kind of swiping and seeing what you're getting these last couple of days. You'll see there that there's also a guide of different colors, so you'll see what they all mean. If you don't want to read all of those, like if you want to keep it simple, just go to the upper left and click on that little wrench button, and you'll be able to see the different kind of graphs that it has. So you have a cumulative charge amount, a cumulative discharge amount, max charge power, highest battery voltage, lowest battery voltage. You can just click and unclick each of those options and it'll show you what those are on your graph. So if you don't want to have everything, just unclick some of those. Now at the very bottom next to historical data, you'll see parameter settings. If you click on that, that's where you can go and make some changes to your settings. At the very top, you'll see regular settings. You'll see system voltage and battery type. Now when you connect this thing for the very first time, it will automatically detect your battery for you and change that battery type accordingly. If you did want to change it though, you can go ahead and do that. Just click on it and then you'll be able to choose from some of these options. You have FLD, which is flood. You have cell, which is sealed lead acid. Then you have gel. Then you have Li for lithium. And then you have use for user. I don't know why they just don't put user. But this is where you can go and make some tweaks to everything yourself. Unless you really know what you're doing, and I don't, I wouldn't choose that. I would just choose one of the pre-made ones, or let the system choose it for you and you'll be good to go. So let's go ahead and connect this and let's see how everything plays out. Just go to the upper right. You'll see a Bluetooth list, and then you'll see the Charge Pro. Go ahead and hit that, connect that, and then it should automatically detect the battery, and it just did. So it just jumped to SEL. Now let's go to real-time monitoring, see what we're getting. And right now you're seeing 20.7 volts going into the solar panel. See, it's getting really sunny and I'm starting to get really hot. And then you have charge mode, it shows boost. So I'm guessing that that thing is trying to gather as much sun as it possibly can to try to get you as much charge as possible. And then below that battery, we're getting 0.57 amps, 14.4 voltage, and 8 watts of power, which is going to fluctuate. You'll see that jump up and down depending on what kind of sun you're getting. You just have to remember that the voltage going into the solar input, which is right now 20.6, needs to always be higher than the voltage going into your battery, which is 14.4 volts. Not seeing any errors, no errors. And then today's running data, highest voltage I've gotten today, 14.8 volts. Lowest voltage was 12.8 volts. Charge amount 7 watts, 7 watt hours. Discharge amount is 0 watt hours, and then max charge power I've gotten today is 33 watts. Again, it's been crazy today, like just the way the sun is coming in and out. So I know that this thing will kind of skip around all over the place. But basically, that's the app, and yeah, pretty easy to navigate once you figure out how all this works, which is kind of why I am talking about this longer than I need to, because of the issues that I had. Hopefully that some of the stuff answered the questions you might have. How long is this video now? It's probably long. I'm sure it's long, but I wanted to make a comprehensive video. I wanted to make a one-stop shop giving you as much information as I had on how to install solar on the G. If you haven't noticed, a couple of times I did say you're more than welcome to skip this part. That way, no matter your level, whether you're just getting into overlanding or you've been doing this for a while, I'm hoping that this video has provided you with the information that you were looking for. But don't worry, I'm not going to be doing a long recap. I'm not going to do any pros and cons because honestly, I haven't owned this equipment long enough to be able to tell you how efficient it is at recharging my battery. But I will say that I really am glad to have solar now, because in a couple of weeks, we're going to be doing the second leg of the Florida Adventure Trail, and I cannot wait to see how well this thing performs and how well it keeps my battery topped off. Although I will give you something to consider, because I was thinking about this today, and that is, how often will I actually be able to take advantage of having solar? Because the way we usually do our trips is during the day, we're hitting the trails, which means the vehicle is on, which means the alternator is running, which means the alternator is charging the battery. And then when we pull into camp, that's usually late afternoon, just before dark, and that's when the vehicle's turned off, but there is no more sun. So really, the only time I'm going to be able to take advantage of solar are during those times when we're sitting idle at camp during the day with the vehicles turned off underneath the sun. So, you know, camping in the forest underneath some trees might also not be advantageous. But I am glad to have a safeguard, or at least some way to harness existing free power that I otherwise wouldn't have been able to harness before. And that, I think, is the real advantage of having solar. But anyway, that's it. I hope this video was helpful. I'm hoping it gave you the information you were looking for, especially if you've been kind of entertaining the idea of getting a solar system set up on your rig. I will definitely give you guys updates as these videos continue, because I want to let you guys know how this thing is performing and whether or not it's really efficient in topping off my battery. If you did like this video, please make sure you hit that like button, subscribe to our channel, and also consider supporting us on Patreon so we can continue to make more content like this. And as always, don't forget to follow us on Instagram at Baptism Overland. My name is Asia Samson, and I will see you next time. Dear God, it's like every week that I've been doing a video lately, it's been freaking hot in here. Forget solar, why isn't there a panel that can harness the power of heat?